Ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin today by acknowledging something profoundly human, something that we all experience but rarely confront with full honesty. For too long, I have stayed silent, not because I lacked words, but because the weight of these words carries with it a responsibility, a clarity, and, frankly, a vulnerability that is daunting. But today I can't stay silent anymore. You deserve to hear this about us, not in vague abstractions, but in a truth that is grounded, empirical, and utterly human. When we talk about relationships, about connections between people, most of the conversation revolves around surface-level interactions, smiles exchanged, texts sent, dinners shared. But beneath the surface lies an intricate web of neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral dynamics that govern every moment we spend together. Your brain, my brain, our brains. They are constantly communicating, predicting, and responding, even when we think we are unaware. And within this invisible dialogue lies the essence of why certain bonds, certain relationships endure, while others falter. Consider the science of mirror neurons, the incredible cells in your brain that fire not just when you act, but when you observe action. They are the biological substrate of empathy. When I see you smile, a small but real network of neurons in my brain lights up as if I am smiling myself. When I feel your hesitation, a cascade of signals tells me to pause, to reflect, to adjust. This is not magic, it is evolution. It is the mechanism by which humans have survived as social creatures for tens of thousands of years. And yet, in our daily lives, we often ignore it. We forget that every glance, every gesture, every unspoken tension carries meaning, and that meaning shapes the trajectory of what we call us. Now, I want to share a story, not a dramatic tale, but a simple moment of truth. A few years ago, I was sitting across from someone I deeply care about. We were in a room filled with the ordinary clutter of life, papers, coffee cups, the quiet hum of the air conditioning. But the energy between us was extraordinary in its subtlety. I watched her hands, the slight lift of an eyebrow, the way she inhaled before speaking. And in that silence, in those tiny micro-movements, I realized something monumental. I had been listening to the wrong things all along. I had been attentive to words, but I had not yet learned to truly hear the signals embedded in our shared presence. That was the moment I understood that relationships are less about what is said, and more about what is felt, observed, and understood on a neurological level. You see, the human brain is exquisitely sensitive to patterns, to contingencies. Our prefrontal cortex constantly calculates the probability of trust, safety, and reciprocity. Every interaction, positive or negative, leaves a trace, a kind of neural fingerprint. And over time, these fingerprints accumulate, forming a deep, subconscious map of how we relate to one another. If you pay attention, if you are patient enough to see beyond the surface, you can literally read a relationship in the synapses and circuits of your partner's brain. And when you do, when you allow yourself to witness the raw truth, it is both exhilarating and terrifying. Because you can no longer pretend. You can no longer hide from the responsibility of connection. I've studied these patterns scientifically, yet I experienced them emotionally in a way that no lab could ever replicate. There were moments of pure, unguarded honesty that forced me to confront my own fears, my own limitations. And here is what I realized: intimacy is not an accident. It is the product of alignment on multiple levels: cognitive, emotional, even biochemical, oxytocin, dopamine, cortisol. These molecules are not just abstract entities floating in our blood. They are the currency of connection. They are the silent partners in every negotiation of trust and vulnerability. When we laugh together, our oxytocin rises. When we comfort each other, our cortisol drops. And when we finally confront the truths we have avoided, our brains are capable of extraordinary adaptation, rewriting old circuits, and creating new pathways for deeper understanding. But here's the paradox: science explains the mechanisms, but it does not dictate the choices. Even knowing the chemistry, even understanding the neuronal pathways, we are faced with the fundamental human dilemma: to act or to stay silent. And it is in this crucible of choice that our story, our relationship, revealed itself most clearly. I had to choose to speak, to disclose, to share not just facts but the entirety of my perception of us. Because silence, as many of you know, can feel safe, but it is a slow erosion. Silence allows assumptions to fester, doubts to crystallize, and distance to grow. Speaking, on the other hand, is a risk. It is an act of vulnerability that demands courage, honesty, and trust. And the truth is, you cannot build a meaningful connection without taking that risk. I want to talk about courage for a moment. Not the kind of courage celebrated in hero myths or in boardrooms, but the quiet, relentless courage of personal honesty. This courage is biological as well as psychological. Research in neuroplasticity shows that when we practice truth, telling in relationships, our brains actually rewire to anticipate, accept, and even reward honesty. In other words, every act of openness strengthens our capacity for future openness. Conversely, every act of avoidance strengthens circuits of fear, avoidance, and defensive reasoning. This is not speculation. It is observable in both fMRI studies and in longitudinal behavioral research. What we choose to say, or not say, literally shapes the architecture of our minds and our connections. And yet, understanding the science alone would be insufficient. It is the lived experience that matters most. The nights of anxious anticipation before a difficult conversation, the butterflies that surge in your chest, the sweat that betrays the words you are trying to hold back. These are not trivialities. They are signals that you care, signals that the relationship matters, signals that the human organism is operating at its highest capacity to protect what is valuable. And this is where intellect and emotion converge. To speak truthfully is to synchronize mind and heart. It is to acknowledge that logic alone is insufficient, and sentiment alone is incomplete. I remember one evening, walking through the quiet streets, reflecting on the patterns of our interactions. Every argument we had, every reconciliation, every shared silence was a data point in the complex system that defined us. It was as if our brains were engaged in a continuous feedback loop, calculating probabilities, predicting outcomes, adjusting behavior, all in the service of survival, belonging, and love. And in that moment of reflection, I realized that the entire narrative of this could be reframed not as a series of conflicts and reconciliations, but as an evolving experiment in human connection, guided by both conscious intention and unconscious processes. So when I finally chose to speak, to break the silence, it was not impulsive. It was informed by decades of observation, of myself, of human behavior, and of the subtle, profound signals that define intimacy. I shared not just my feelings, but my understanding of the mechanisms that had shaped them. I spoke of the neurobiology, the emotional architecture, the shared history, the potential futures. And what happened next was extraordinary, because when someone is truly heard, not just their words, but the underlying patterns of thought and feeling, they respond with a kind of openness that is transformative. Fear diminishes, trust increases, and the relationship enters a new state of coherence. It is, in a sense, the human brain performing an act of alchemy, turning raw emotional data into gold. And yet, this does not mean the process is painless. There is discomfort in acknowledging vulnerabilities, in confronting unconscious biases, in revealing the truths that might unsettle both parties. But discomfort is a signal. It is the biological equivalent of a compass pointing to growth. And the choice to face that discomfort, to navigate the uncertainty, is the very essence of meaningful connection. We have all been conditioned to fear discomfort, to seek the illusion of stability. But real intimacy, real understanding, emerges only when we traverse the terrain of discomfort with courage, empathy, and intention. I want to emphasize one final insight that science has illuminated for me. The human brain thrives on narrative. We make sense of life not through isolated events, but through stories that integrate experience, intention, and prediction. And our story, the story of us, is precisely that, a living adaptive narrative. Every choice, every disclosure, every acknowledgement of truth is a chapter, a line of code in the complex algorithm of our relationship. And as the author of my own actions, I realized that withholding the narrative, censoring the truth was not a protective measure. It was a distortion, a mutation in the integrity of our shared story. So today, I speak openly, not because I seek approval or validation, but because the act of speaking is itself an affirmation of what we are capable of: honesty, empathy, and connection. Because when we engage with the science of the mind, when we honor the emotional reality of our experiences, we discover that relationships are not merely social constructs. They are living, breathing systems of interdependent intelligence, capable of extraordinary resilience, growth, and transformation. I cannot promise that our path forward will be free from challenge, or that our neural circuits will not at times misfire, sending waves of misinterpretation and doubt. But I can promise this: if we continue to act with awareness, courage, and compassion, our shared system, our us, will adapt, grow, and thrive in ways that transcend what either of us could achieve alone. This is the beauty of the human brain, the human heart, and the human connection. It is not static, it is not predetermined, and it is capable of evolution that is as inspiring as any technological breakthrough. So I say to you today with full clarity and conviction, I can't stay silent anymore. We are not perfect, and we are not finished. But we are capable of more than silence, more than fear, more than distance. We are capable of truth. We are capable of understanding. We are capable of a connection that is informed by science, grounded in reality, and enriched by the profound depth of human experience. And if there is one thing I want you to take from this, one realization that can transform your own relationships, it is this: honesty is not just moral, it is biological. Transparency is not just emotional, it is neurological. And courage is not just a virtue, it is the mechanism by which we evolve together, by which we write new stories, by which we truly live, not merely exist. So, today, I speak because you deserve to hear this. Today I act because silence is no longer acceptable. And today we step forward together, not as isolated individuals, but as a system, a network, a living testament to what it means to understand, to empathize, and to connect. And in that understanding, in that shared vulnerability, we find the potential for something extraordinary, something that can endure, transform, and elevate us both in ways that are as real as the neurons firing in our brains, and as timeless as the human desire to belong. And with that, I simply leave you with this thought: the truth, once spoken, has a gravity of its own. It reshapes the landscape of possibility, it clarifies what matters, and it invites us all to participate fully in the life we are capable of co-creating. That is why I speak today, and why I cannot and will not stay silent any longer. And yet, even as I speak these truths, I know that the journey does not end with a single declaration. Understanding, like life itself, is iterative. It unfolds in layers, in cycles of reflection, dialogue, and adaptation. Every relationship is a living experiment, an ongoing calibration between two dynamic systems, each with its own history, its own biases, its own patterns of neural activity. And this is what makes the work both challenging and beautiful. Because when we commit to this process, when we commit to speaking our truths and listening with intention, we are not merely maintaining a connection, we are evolving it. I recall another moment, in the quiet aftermath of a disagreement, when the usual defenses had faded, leaving only raw honesty. There was a tension in the air that was almost palpable, a mixture of regret, anticipation, and the unspoken fear that the truth might push us apart. But as we began to speak slowly, deliberately, I noticed something remarkable. The very act of articulating our thoughts and feelings began to rewire the emotional landscape between us. The tension did not vanish instantly, but it transformed. The neural circuits that had encoded fear and defensiveness were now activating with circuits of empathy and curiosity. This is not metaphor, it is neurobiology in action. And it is precisely this transformation that allows humans to move from conflict to connection, from misunderstanding to insight. It is fascinating to consider how often we underestimate the impact of small actions in relationships. A gaze held a fraction longer, a question asked with genuine curiosity, a pause to truly hear the other person. These seemingly minor gestures create ripples in the neural and emotional environment of our interactions. Over time, those ripples accumulate, building a reservoir of trust, respect, and intimacy. Science tells us that these are not abstract concepts, they are measurable, tangible outcomes, observable in the patterns of brain activity, in hormonal responses, and in behavioral adjustments. And when we consciously cultivate these patterns, we are engaging in one of the most powerful acts imaginable. We are shaping the very architecture of our shared human experience. But I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the discomfort inherent in this process. Vulnerability is not optional, it is unavoidable. And it is often terrifying. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, decision-making, and risk assessment, lights up when we consider revealing something deeply personal. Our amygdala, the ancient seat of fear, signals potential danger. Our autonomic nervous system prepares the body for flight or freeze. Every moment of honesty is therefore a biological act of courage, a defiance of instinct in favor of conscious intention. And this is precisely why speaking up is so transformative. It is an alignment of mind, body, and spirit, a deliberate choice to prioritize connection over self-preservation. I have learned that the moments of greatest insight in a relationship often come not from perfect harmony, but from friction. Disagreements, misunderstandings, and emotional turbulence are not failures. They are data. They are signals that our systems are engaged, that our patterns are interacting, that adaptation is possible. Neuroscience shows us that the brain responds to challenge with plasticity, remodeling itself in response to new input. In human terms, this means that conflict, when approached with honesty and reflection, can actually strengthen the bond between people, rather than weaken it. It is a process of mutual refinement, a continuous iteration of understanding, empathy, and alignment. And yet, understanding this intellectually is not sufficient. The real work, the transformative work, is lived in the moment-to-moment experience of connection. It is in noticing the tremor in someone's voice when they are afraid to speak. It is in interpreting the micro-expressions, the fleeting furrow of a brow, the subtle shift of posture, that convey more than words ever could. It is in allowing yourself to be seen as fully human, to let your own fears, imperfections, and desires be acknowledged and held in the shared space of the relationship. This is the ultimate paradox. Only by revealing our vulnerabilities can we access the strength, resilience, and depth that define authentic intimacy. I want to emphasize the importance of temporal perspective in relationships. Just as the brain integrates sensory input over time to form coherent perceptions, so too must we integrate experiences across the timeline of our shared lives. Yesterday's missteps do not define us, nor do tomorrow's uncertainties determine our potential. What matters is the continuous, intentional engagement of the present, the conscious observation, interpretation, and action that shape the unfolding narrative of us. In practical terms, this means taking the time to notice patterns, to articulate observations, and to validate the emotional reality of the other person. It means treating the relationship not as a static entity, but as a dynamic, evolving system, one that responds to care, attention, and deliberate effort. And let us not forget the role of self-awareness in this process. The most profound connections are not possible without deep introspection, without understanding our own biases, triggers, and tendencies. Neuroscience shows that metacognition, the ability to reflect on our own thinking, engages higher order cortical regions that support empathy, self-regulation, and perspective-taking. In other words, the more we understand ourselves, the more capable we become of understanding others. And in a relationship, this self-knowledge is not a solitary achievement, it is the foundation upon which mutual understanding is built. There is an additional layer, often overlooked, that is equally vital: the interplay of narrative and meaning. Humans are storytelling creatures. Our brains construct coherent narratives out of disparate events, assigning causality, significance, and emotion. In relationships, the stories we tell ourselves and each other shape perception, memory, and expectation. When we speak honestly about us, we are not merely exchanging words, we are co-authoring a narrative that defines the meaning of our connection. And when that narrative is grounded in truth, empathy, and shared insight, it becomes resilient. It withstands misunderstanding, it adapts to change, and it evolves in complexity and depth over time. And here I must acknowledge the role of choice. Knowledge of neuroscience, psychology, or emotional dynamics does not compel action. Awareness alone is insufficient. What transforms understanding into reality is the deliberate decision to act, to speak, to listen, to empathize, to reveal, and to engage. Each moment of intentionality reinforces the patterns of connection, strengthens the circuits of trust, and deepens the emotional resonance between two people. In a sense, every choice we make is a small act of creation, shaping not only the trajectory of the relationship, but the architecture of our own minds. Finally, I want to reflect on the broader implications of what it means to speak. To break silence is to assert presence, agency, and commitment. It is to honor the intelligence of the human brain, the sophistication of emotion, and the fundamental need for connection. Silence may feel safe, but it is corrosive. It allows doubt, misinterpretation, and distance to accumulate. Speech, when authentic and informed, is generative. It creates clarity, invites engagement, and fosters resilience. And the courage to speak, especially about difficult truths, is not merely an act of communication, it is an act of love, integrity, and shared evolution. So I leave you with this: I have spoken today, because the truths we withhold are not neutral. They shape our lives, our perceptions, and the possibilities for connection. I have spoken because silence, no matter how comfortable it may seem, cannot sustain the depth, complexity, and vitality of what we are capable of as human beings. And I have spoken because the act of revealing, of sharing, of witnessing each other fully, is the foundation of a connection that is resilient, adaptive, and extraordinary. We are not perfect, we are not complete. But in the act of honesty, in the embrace of vulnerability, in the intentional cultivation of understanding, we are creating something remarkable. Something that transcends individual limitations, that leverages the profound capacities of the human mind and heart, and that allows us to co-create a narrative that is grounded, alive, and limitless in potential. And so I end not with a conclusion, but with a lived truth: the courage to speak, the courage to witness, the courage to act in alignment with both reason and empathy is the most radical, transformative, and human thing we can do. It is the act that bridges science and emotion, intellect and heart, self and other. It is the act that defines the trajectory of our shared story. And it is the act that, ultimately, allows us to experience the full depth, richness, and beauty of what it truly means to connect. And now, as I reflect on all of this, I realize there is something even more profound at play: the recognition that every human connection is a co-created ecosystem. Each thought, each feeling, each decision contributes to the state of that ecosystem. And when one party chooses silence, however well-intentioned, that ecosystem becomes imbalanced. The unseen tension accumulates, the neural circuits of stress and uncertainty are activated, and the potential for understanding diminishes. Conversely, when honesty is introduced, even in small increments, it catalyzes a cascade of adaptation. Our brains respond with receptivity, our hearts respond with warmth, our shared space responds with clarity. And in that responsiveness lies the miracle of human connection, the ability to transform mere coexistence into genuine co-evolution. I think often about the complexity of feedback loops in relationships. In neuroscience, feedback loops are mechanisms through which a system regulates itself, adjusts to stimuli, and maintains stability. But in human relationships, feedback loops are more than mechanical. They are emotional, interpretive, and deeply contextual. A look of concern prompts reassurance, which prompts openness, which in turn generates trust, which fosters further expression. These loops are delicate, but they are extraordinarily powerful. And what is fascinating is that they can be shaped intentionally by our awareness and our choices. Every word spoken with intention, every moment of true listening, Every act of vulnerability amplifies the positive feedback, strengthening the system rather than weakening it. I remember a day not long ago when this became unmistakably clear. We had spent weeks navigating tension over a misunderstanding. It was one of those conflicts that seems trivial on the surface, but carries layers of history, unspoken assumptions, and subtle fears. We could have avoided it, brushed it aside, or let silence stretch it into resentment. But instead, we chose to engage. We dissected our assumptions, shared our interpretations, acknowledged the limitations of our own perception, and allowed space for genuine acknowledgement of each other's emotional reality. What happened next was remarkable. The tension didn't vanish immediately, but it transformed. There was clarity, there was relief, and there was a profound sense of connection. A tangible, almost measurable shift in the ecosystem of our relationship. Neuroscience would describe it as a recalibration of neural pathways. I experienced it as a realignment of hearts and minds. And here is the truth I have come to understand: love, empathy, and trust are not static end states. They are emergent properties of dynamic systems. They are created through attention, intention, and action. They are not merely felt, they are built, moment by moment, through conscious engagement. And this is why I can no longer remain silent. Silence is not neutral. It is a choice that shapes the trajectory of our shared system, often in ways that diminish potential. Speaking, on the other hand, is an active intervention, a deliberate act of shaping reality toward growth, understanding, and connection. The human brain is capable of astonishing adaptation when we choose this path. Neuroplasticity, the ability of neurons to reorganize, strengthen, and form new connections, allows us to heal old patterns, create new ones, and expand the capacity for empathy and understanding. And this capacity is amplified in relationships. When we speak openly, when we engage with authenticity, the brain responds not only in the individual but in the dyad, the we, that emerges becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Synaptic connections fire in synchrony, emotional regulation becomes more efficient, and trust is biochemically reinforced. This is not theory. It is a lived, observable phenomenon, one that transforms ordinary relationships into extraordinary partnerships of intellect, emotion, and intention. But let me be clear, this transformation is not automatic. It requires vigilance, courage, and consistency. It requires the willingness to confront discomfort, to tolerate uncertainty, and to engage in continuous reflection. It requires the acknowledgement that misunderstanding, miscommunication, and misperception are inevitable, but not insurmountable. The very act of confronting these realities, rather than avoiding them, is what allows a relationship to evolve toward resilience, depth, and authenticity. And that is why I speak today with full transparency. I speak because avoidance has limits. It leaves potential unrealized, growth stifled, and connection unfulfilled. I speak because the truth, when articulated with care and intention, has the power to realign systems, heal patterns, and create space for flourishing. I speak because relationships are not passive. They are living, adaptive networks that respond to the energy, attention, and honesty that we bring to them. And I speak because you, as a participant in this shared system, deserve not silence but clarity, not avoidance but engagement, not fear but courageous understanding. As I look forward, I see a horizon defined not by perfection, but by possibility. I see a space in which mistakes are opportunities, in which vulnerability is a strength, and in which the act of speaking, truly speaking, becomes the vehicle for transformation. I see a reality in which two humans, acting with intention, empathy, and courage, can create a shared narrative that is richer, deeper, and more resilient than anything that either could have achieved alone. And in that vision, I find both hope and responsibility, the responsibility to continue choosing honesty, engagement, and authenticity every single day. And so, I end not with a tidy conclusion, but with an invitation to witness, to reflect, to act, to recognize that the silences we hold are not neutral. They shape our world. To understand that every word, every gesture, every act of listening has the power to transform. To embrace the idea that we are creators of a system that is at once deeply personal and profoundly universal, and to commit, in whatever way is meaningful, to the courage of truth, the integrity of empathy, and the boundless potential of connection. We are not perfect. We will falter. We will misinterpret, misjudge, and misstep. But in the relentless pursuit of understanding, in the continual choice to speak and to listen, in the dedication to align mind, heart, and action, we are capable of something extraordinary. We are capable of not merely surviving together, but thriving together, co-evolving in ways that honor both science and emotion, reason and intuition, self and other. So today I choose to speak. I choose to acknowledge what is real, what is present, and what is possible. I choose to honor the system that we have co-created, the patterns we have shaped, and the future we can continue to build. I choose to transform silence into clarity, hesitation into courage, and fear into the profound, exhilarating potential of human connection. And in doing so, I invite you to witness, to reflect, and to participate fully in the extraordinary capacity of two human beings to understand, to adapt, and to flourish together. This is why I can't stay silent anymore. This is why I speak. And this, I believe, is why it matters. And as I reflect on all of this, I want to speak to something even deeper. The notion that connection is not merely transactional, nor is it incidental. It is a profound interplay of presence, attention, and shared meaning. Each interaction, each moment of honesty, each willingness to be seen, contributes to a tapestry far larger than any individual experience. Neuroscience tells us that our brains are predictive machines, constantly modeling the intentions, emotions, and responses of those around us. But prediction alone is not enough. What transforms mere interaction into connection is conscious engagement. The deliberate act of observing, understanding, and responding with both intelligence and empathy. I recall walking together through a quiet park, long after a difficult conversation had passed. The air was crisp, the sunlight softened by the late afternoon, and for a moment, the world felt suspended. In that silence, I realized something critical. Connection does not require constant action or dramatics. It thrives in presence. It thrives in attention. It thrives in the recognition that even when words are absent, our shared existence communicates volumes. The eyes, the subtle expressions, the rhythm of breath. All of these convey understanding far beyond what language alone can achieve. And when we honor these signals, when we allow ourselves to fully inhabit the same space, something extraordinary emerges: a resonance, a synchrony, a neural and emotional harmony that validates, affirms, and amplifies the bond between us. And yet this harmony is fragile. It requires maintenance, vigilance, and care. It requires that we notice the micro patterns of behavior that indicate disconnection, a slight withdrawal, a subtle defensiveness, a hesitation to engage. These are the warning signals that the feedback loops of the relationship are being disrupted. Neuroscience shows that even brief lapses in communication can activate stress responses, elevating cortisol and creating a subtle but persistent tension in the system. And what is remarkable, and perhaps humbling, is that these disruptions are not failures but opportunities. They are invitations to observe, to adjust, and to intervene thoughtfully. They are moments when speaking, rather than retreating into silence, has the power to restore balance and generate growth. I think often about how fear shapes human behavior, particularly in relationships. The amygdala, that ancient sentinel of threat detection, is exquisitely sensitive to ambiguity, unpredictability, and potential rejection. It triggers instinctual reactions designed to protect us. But these same mechanisms, while protective, can also inhibit growth, intimacy, and understanding if left unchecked. It is in this tension between instinct and intention that the courage to speak emerges. To articulate a difficult truth, to acknowledge vulnerability, to share insight without guarantee of response, is to confront the biological machinery of fear and to redirect it toward connection. And in doing so, we create not just a dialogue, but a transformative experience that reshapes neural patterns, emotional expectations, and relational potential. And here is the paradox that I have come to embrace: silence feels safe, but it is corrosive. Speaking, though risky, is regenerative. Silence maintains the status quo, but truth catalyzes evolution. And in relationships, evolution is everything. It is the mechanism by which we learn, adapt, and grow, not just as individuals, but as a unit, as a system, as a living, adaptive entity capable of transcending the limitations of the past. The human brain, the human heart, and the human spirit are wired for this kind of dynamic engagement. And when we choose it, when we commit to it, the results are nothing short of extraordinary. I want to share one last observation, drawn from both science and lived experience. Meaning is not inherent in relationships. It is constructed. Every act of attention, every expression of honesty, every choice to engage fully contributes to the narrative that defines the we experience. When we withhold truth, we distort the narrative. When we speak openly, we co-author a story that is coherent, adaptive, and resilient. This is why the act of breaking silence is not simply communication. It is creation. It is the creation of possibility, of alignment, of shared understanding, and ultimately, of the kind of human experience that is profound, sustaining, and transformative. So today I speak. I speak because the silence that once protected me is no longer sufficient. I speak because you and the connection we share deserve clarity, honesty, and the courage to confront what is real. I speak because the act of truth-telling, difficult, imperfect, and courageous, is the single most powerful mechanism we have for shaping our shared human experience. I speak because the brain, the heart, and the system we inhabit respond to authenticity in ways that are measurable, observable, and transformative. And in this act of speaking, I recognize something extraordinary: that the choice to engage fully, to reveal, to witness, and to be witnessed is not merely personal. It is universal. It is the essence of what it means to be human. It is the mechanism by which love, trust, and understanding are built. It is the way we transform silence into clarity, fear into courage, uncertainty into possibility, and mere coexistence into a thriving, evolving partnership capable of extraordinary depth and resilience. So let us embrace this. Let us recognize that silence, while tempting, is not neutral. Let us understand that every word, every gesture, every act of conscious engagement carries weight, shapes outcomes, and determines the potential of our connection. Let us choose courage, empathy, and truth, not because it is easy, but because it is vital. And let us move forward together, with awareness, with intention, and with the unwavering recognition that the capacity for understanding, adaptation, and profound human connection resides not somewhere in the abstract, but here, in the choices we make every day, in the presence we bring, and in the courage to speak when silence has held sway for too long. And so, I speak. I speak because it matters. I speak because the possibilities of us are too significant to leave unarticulated. I speak because silence, though familiar, is no longer acceptable. And I speak because, in the act of speaking, in the deliberate engagement of mind, heart, and attention, we create a reality that is greater than the sum of our fears, limitations, and past misunderstandings. We create a reality that honors both science and emotion, intellect and empathy, self and other. We create a reality that is alive, adaptive, and extraordinary.